afternoon, or good morning, sorry, we're still morning. My name is Paul Roesler. I teach poli-sci here. I'm going to be doing a talk on global comparison of how leaders are chosen. But before, again, I just want to introduce what this is this week. We've been doing Democracy Days for 25 years, and I think, if I recall, Professor Mike Kelker was the founder of Democracy Days. He was the biggest promoter and supporter of it for many, many years. He died last year, so we're kind of, we're honoring we're honoring him. In fact, this lesson, obviously, of course, is I'm sure one of the best ones you're going to see all week, of course. But there's a really good one next hour on art and democracy and civic engagement, and with the League of Volunteer Enthusiasts of KDHX, which is the radio station that Mike Kelker volunteered at. And so, if you're around at 1 o'clock, that should be a really good panel discussion. Tomorrow, we've got some really excellent panels tomorrow as well. At 10 a.m., we've got the Election 24. Sidney Young is going to talk about the election as a whole. We're going to talk about all the issues, how the whole process works, what we're doing, what we're voting on. At 11:30, two speakers are going to talk about activism, censorship, and education. And then at 1 o'clock, Professor Raj Gopalan from psychology is going to talk about democratizing AI. And then we have our final two discussions on Thursday. I'm going to be back at 10 a.m. talking about specifically about Missouri Amendment 3, which is, we weren't sure, but it is going to be on the ballot. Which is going to try to put in the Constitution, the Missouri Constitution, the right to have an abortion. And then at 11 o'clock, our final panelist will be me kind of organizing. I'm there as well, but it's going to be talking about Palestine and Gaza and Israel, and just we're going to have an IDF soldier come, a member of the Israeli Defense Forces, via Zoom. Not actually, they're not flying all the way here to St. Charles Community College. They're joining us via Zoom, but we also have a Palestinian refugee coming, as well as a pastor and a theology student as well, talking about Gaza and Israel. So that's our last panel of the session. So hopefully you can come to more, but welcome today. So I usually start my classes with, oh, I see. That won't make sense. You did that. Oh, that's brilliant. Okay. I usually start my classes with a little bit of a clip. So hopefully this will work. No, right?
Just because I'm tired of Barack Obama and Mitt Romney.
That's why you're crying? Oh, it'll be over soon, Abby. Okay? The election will be over soon, okay?
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. So, one of the things we had this conversation. This is kind of a last-minute addition to the list of events. We had someone else get another job and move out, so we had a slot. So I said, well, Kamala Harris had just become the nominee, and I had a lot of people who were like, how did that, what? Wait, we had Joe Biden all the way through this, and now it's Kamala? So, so I thought I would have a little discussion about American elections, and then comparing about how other countries do things. So that's kind of where this whole idea comes from. And one of the interesting things about our electoral system is that it's really, really long. I'm sure none of you are tired, right? I think you're all really excited for 2 more months of elections, I think. I mean, I think for campaign ads, and I'm sure you're all excited about that. But shockingly, a lot of Americans are sick and tired of campaign ads, of phone calls, and all that stuff at this point. And that's kind of what Abby is crying about. This is the 2012 election she's crying about, but it's a great synopsis of how many Americans feel about our interminably long election process. So the other thing I'll also touch on is why we only have 2 political parties, because that's very different. So a couple things that make America different, whether you make America great or not, the way to make America different from other countries is that ours is a much longer process, much longer than other countries do. And the other thing is we only have 2 political parties. Most other countries have multiple parties. We have 2 choices. Yes, I know you could actually vote for the Green Party on election day, and have fun. It ain't gonna win, okay? You're gonna have one of 2 choices for president. It's either gonna be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. That's all you're gonna get. Apparently, the shooter, the person that apparently tried to assassinate Donald Trump, was a big Vivek Ramaswamy person. He really wanted Ramaswamy and what is her name? Nikki Haley to be the Republican nominees, and that's apparently why he was really mad at Trump. And that's apparently why he was trying to take out Trump. He really wanted different Republicans to run against Kamala Harris. But that's not how we do it in this country. So, just a really brief synopsis of how our elections work here in this country. It's a really long 2-year process. Although actually, Donald Trump set a record of making it almost 4 years after he won in 2016. Soon after Election Day in 2017, he announced he was running again for 2020 election. So we had the longest campaign in history, was a 3.5-year campaign between 2017 and 2020. But typically campaigning starts, we have elections, we have the general election, which is in every 4 years, and then in the intervening 2 years, we have what are called midterm elections. So we had some in 2022, we'll have obviously the 2024 elections, and then we'll have midterms in 2026. So typically, candidates announce their interest in running for president after the midterm election. So in 2020, late 2022, early 2023, candidates threw their hats in the ring. And that's typically how it works. So it's basically a 2-year election cycle. Starting the January of the election year, so January of 2024, states around the country have primaries. There are caucuses too, but basically they're losing favor, or we're basically shifting towards a primary system. Anyone know what a primary is? Yeah. Okay, I called it, you freaked out. All right, is anyone else? What's a primary? What's a primary? Okay, it's a way for a party to narrow down candidates for an election, okay? And so what happens is we have a party system. In most countries, what they do is they have a party system. And parties are really useful things. One of the most important things parties do is they run candidates for office. In this case, they nominate. That's the word they use. They nominate candidates for office. So who are the 2 nominees for president of the 2 major parties? Hopefully that's not a shocker. Pictures, no? One picture's up there. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to trick you, but only one of the pictures up there. One of them's wrong. Yes. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Yes. So the Republican Party nominated Donald Trump. The Democratic Party nominated Kamala Harris. Now, how do we get there? Well, so this is the process. So every state has an election, And the winners of that election, if you win a state, you get delegates. And they're your delegates, and they go to this convention. So there's a Republican Party convention, and there's a Democratic Party convention. Now, the other parties have conventions too, but again, in this country, we don't care because they're not going to win. In our system, we have a two-party system where either it's going to be a Democratic victor or a Republican victor. So the convention, so they get all these votes, and so we knew it was going to be Joe Biden, for example, because by early spring, Joe Biden had locked up enough delegates to know he was going to be the nominee. But then what happened? What happened in June? Yeah.
He dropped out.
Why?
It's too old.
Too old? Okay. All right. Okay, but why? What set it off? Yeah, so there was a June debate, really early debate, and I was actually, I think it was my anniversary, so I didn't actually end up watching it, but everyone who watched it said it was just, Joe Biden was absolutely horrible in the debate, and people were saying, you just got to drop out, you're too old, or whatever the reason was, and Joe Biden at the time, he would have been the oldest president in history. If he had run. Now, ironically, Donald Trump is now going to be the oldest president in history if he wins. But at the time, Joe Biden was, and it was a terrible debate. So he said, actually, I'm not going to run. So what happened? Well, there was a convention just a couple weeks ago, not that long ago. And in July, you had the Republican convention, and then a few weeks after that, you had the Democratic Party convention. And what happens at these conventions, that's where the official decision is made. Which person would name? So there's Trump getting his nomination. And so here is the hopefully this clip will work, maybe.
The purpose of the convention is to officially nominate the party's presidential ticket, and they do that through a state roll call. Here's what that looked like at the Republican convention a few weeks ago.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures of this convention, Oklahoma, 43 votes, President Trump.
Okay. The Democrats changed things up a bit. Each state got to cast their votes for the nominee, accompanied by a live DJ spinning state-themed songs. Georgia, how do you cast your vote?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to officially nominate Kamala Harris for president. Get out, put your finger on the shots. DNC, turn out for what?
So normally it's not done to music, but basically that is the roll call vote. Every state says, okay, all these delegates from Missouri, from Georgia, from other states, who do you cast your votes for? And that is how we decide who the nominee is. So even though Joe Biden dropped out really late, that's why Kamala Harris was able to easily become the nominee, because he was not technically, even though he had the votes to become the nominee, he was not technically the nominee, if that makes sense. That's different than most other democracies. Now, typically, in America, people just step forward and say, I'm going to run. I'm going to be the nominee. I'm going to run. Pete Buttigieg in the Democratic Party said, I'm going to run, and Kamala Harris and all these other people said that. And then in the Republican Party, you had Vivek Ramaswamy, you had Nikki Haley. Who else? A couple of ones that's coming off the top of my head. Probably because of that assassination attempt. But there were other candidates. They just said, we're going to run. In other democracies, typically you have to have a recommendation from members of, basically the legislature recommends candidates to run. And so here, we're putting this candidate up, we're putting this candidate up, we're putting this candidate up. And that's typically how it works in other democracies. You don't have a primary, you don't have campaigning per se. Then, like in Britain, for the Conservatives and the Labour Party, they go ahead and send out ballots to the dues-paying members. So you have to be a dues-paying member of the Conservative Party. In other words, you pay yearly dues, or a dues-paying member of the Labor Party. You have to pay dues, then you get a vote. If you don't pay dues, you don't get a vote. And so there's a lot lower turnout in who decides the nominees are. Basically, that decides the leader of the party. Then the leader of those parties stand in for a general election. That's kind of how it works. One real difference is that once they announce an election, it's typically, we're talking 4 to 6 weeks. So imagine we've gone through 2 years of constant election campaign. Now you can see why Abby is trying, because I think we're all done getting phone calls and emails. Please, you gotta support me, give me some money, show up and vote for 2 years, okay? Why? Well, we talk about that a little bit. I think I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about that later. So earlier I mentioned we have 2 parties. Democrats, Republicans. You have other parties. You have the Green Party. You have typically, I think in Missouri, sometimes we have a constitutional party. Who was roadkill leader? RFK. What was his party officially? I forgot what his party was. He was actually going to run as an independent, but I think he was running as some party later. You have other parties, they don't win. But other democracies actually have third parties that actually get votes, that actually are successful in elections. And the biggest reason why we don't have meaningful third parties in America is because of the rules of our elections. One of my things that you're my students, I see some of my students out there, I talk about the definition of politics is who gets what, when, and how. One of my favorite parts of the definition that probably drives my students nuts the most is the how. And that's because in terms of politics, how you do something can affect the outcome. How you do something can affect the outcome. Oops. Okay. I guess it's not time. So how you do something affects the election. And because we use something called single-member election districts, whereas members of Congress, members of the legislature are elected in individual districts. This is basically a fake ballot. This is not a real ballot. Who do you vote for? And Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, or whatever. The person with the most votes, that person is the nominee. Even if they only get 35% of the vote, they are the member of Congress. They're the representative. They're the senator. You don't need a majority. You simply need the most votes. And we use what's called, I'm not sure why that keeps going. We use what's called a single-member election district. So you can see in Missouri, there are individual districts. So some of you are probably in District 2. Some of you are in District 3. Keeps going forward. And they redraw the district lines, and basically whoever wins whoever gets the most votes in that district wins that district. Now that's different. So here's a what if kind of. So if 38% in District 1 went Republican, who's going to win District 1? Republican, right? With 38% of the vote, they'll win. In District 8, 38% would be Democrat. Would be winner. Look at the independent votes. Look at 25% of the votes went for a third party. 25%. Yet of Missouri's 8 congressional districts, the 8 districts we have, 25% of the vote went for independent. Yet how many seats did they get? 0. Because they didn't win a district. It's a winner-take-all, single-member election district. You have to win that district. You have to get more votes than any other party to win seats. So the biggest difference between American elections and other elections, in most other democracies, now there are, we'll talk about the UK in a minute, most other democracies is that they don't do it this way. They have what's called proportional representation. In which case, if you win 25% of the vote, you would get 25% of the seats in the legislature. We don't do that. So therefore, third parties don't win. So if you're ever frustrated, it's like, why? I'm so frustrated. Why? I want to vote for third parties. I don't need it. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. Third parties are going to lose. They're just going to lose because of the rules of our system. Aha, the rules of our system ensure third parties don't win. So you are welcome to vote third party, just as a protest vote, but they're not going to. So briefly talk about how other countries do stuff. The UK uses what are called single-member election districts, like America does. But what's interesting, and what we're going to talk about in my comparative politics class, and we're going to talk about the UK, is that actually third parties do a little bit better in Britain than they do here. One of the advantages that third parties in Britain have is a geographical issue, is that they have, although this last election they got swamped. But generally speaking, third parties don't do all that well in Britain. For example, the Labour Party got only 30% of the vote, but got 63% of the seats in the last election, which was what, June? When was that last election? It was recently, I forgot what it was. I don't have the date, but it was just a few months ago. So they only won 34% of the vote, yet they got 63% of the seats in Parliament because they barely won each district, and therefore, it's a single member first past the post, they won the district. So here's their seat share. Conservatives got 24% of the vote, yet they only got 19% of the legislative seats. Now, the last election, it was flipped. Conservatives had the most votes, but it had like 30-some-odd%, and it actually had a majority of the vote. So the way it works with single-member election districts is that it typically ensures that third parties have very little representation, very little votes. Although Lib Dems do get some votes in the UK. Now, if you didn't use that system, use a proportional system, you would basically vote for whatever party you wanted to, and whichever party actually got the, if they got 20% of the vote, and they got 10% of the vote, they would get 10% of the seats. So you'd actually see some real representation. So in South Africa, you see third parties, you can see, this is from 2019, I believe, yeah. So you can see that they basically get the number of seats based on proportional to the number of votes they got in the last election. So if your third party gets 10%, you get 10% of the votes. And that means in that system, you are not throwing away your vote. Because if in our system, if the Green Party gets 10% of the vote, what do they get? Nothing. In that system, they get 10% of the seats in the legislature. So they actually get meaningful representation in government in that system. So one of the biggest differences between our system and most of the rest of the world is that most of the world uses proportional representation. The Germans have a little bit different approach. They actually have I kind of like it actually. They actually do both. Oops, I keep stepping forward on. Half the seats are with are based on proportional representation, and the other half are actually district members. And the reason why the argument for districts is that if you have a district, you are actually representing. Therefore, you are from that district, and therefore you're going to represent the people of that area. Okay? Whereas proportional representation typically is viewed as representing an ideology more. It's like the Green Party. So the idea behind district representation is that, well, they're from St. Charles, So I know they're gonna care about what happens to me in St. Charles because he's from St. Charles, right? And so that's the idea behind districts. So Germany kind of does it both ways. You have half the seats through district representation, single member first past the post district, and the other half through proportional. So you have actually 2 votes. You vote for your rep, and then you vote for your party, which party you want to see. So I think that's kind of a cool approach. In Germany, you actually have, and you actually have, some of this is Italian too. You see a lot more diverse parties in these other European countries, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, than you would. So I do weird, when I travel, I like taking, photos of political signs and whatnot too, so that's what we're talking about there. Communist Party, Socialist Party, Green Party, all over Europe. It's much more common to see that because again, if you get 5% of the vote, you actually get 5% of the seats. So, which is better? Single member election districts or proportional representation? And that's what's fun about poli-sci, is that most of political science is not a question of this is better than this. It's what you prefer, what you care about more. So if you care about regional representation, then you would want single members. You would want single member districts. Okay? Now also, single member districts tend to be more stable. As you saw in the British election, the Labour Party only got 34% of the vote, yet they easily dominate the legislature because they're going to easily control it. Whereas in a lot of other countries, for example, Israel, right? Israel has this fractured proportional representation system. You've got all these different parties trying to, have a coalition. No one party is going to control the government, so you have this coalition government. And so one of the reasons why a lot of people argue that Israel is so messed up right now is because the prime minister is beholden to these right-wing extremist parties that want to massacre all Palestinians, basically. And so he really can't make a deal. He can't release the hostages because they've said, these fringe parties that are in his government that are keeping him in power have said, if you make a deal to release the hostages, we're going to back out. And so he's beholden to these fringe parties because it's a proportional representation system. So that's the downside of proportional representation. Yes, you have greater ideological representation, okay, but you have a lot more parties, and you're almost ensuring that no one party is going to be able to have a government by and of itself. You have to have what's called a coalition. So Italy's had over 60 governments since World War II. I mean, it's every year or two they have a new election because the government falls apart. It's pretty common. And Israel's kind of a mess right now for that same reason. Now, that isn't the only 2 options. The French have a really interesting approach. They have districts, just like we have districts. But in our system, if you get 38%, you win the election. If you get more votes than anybody else, you win. In the French system, no. You have to get a majority of that district. So what do you think happens in the French system if no party gets a majority in each district? What do you think has to happen? Someone back here. You have to have a runoff election, another election. You have to have another election, typically like 2 weeks later. And that's the same with the presidential election as well. If no presidential candidate gets a majority, they have to have a runoff election with basically about 2 weeks later. I think it's almost exact. I forgot, but just a couple weeks, really soon after. So in 2024, just a few months ago, they had this election. In fact, it was seen as a really bad decision on Macron because they had European elections, and the far right, the National Rally, which is a far right, I'm not sure I'd say fascist, but it's quasi-fascist political party, did really well. And Macron said, okay, let's have an election now. And And people are like, what are you doing, Macron? You're gonna turn this over to the far right. Well, it didn't happen that way. Because again, they have this two-step process. So the first step, the National Rally did really well. They actually came in ahead of many other parties. But what didn't they do? They didn't get a majority. So then there was another round. And what happened in France is that all the other parties, so whenever there was a National Rally candidate, all the other parties threw their support in the opposition to the National Rally. And it was really interesting what happened.
National Assembly elections, which just happened, were held in 2 rounds. In each constituency, if no candidate won a majority of the votes in the first round, then the top 2, as well as anyone else who received votes equivalent to at least 12.5% of registered voters, go through to the second round, where whoever gets the most votes wins.
After the first round of French elections, we saw the right-wing National Rally getting huge wins, with them getting over 33% of the vote, which was the highest of any single party. Marine Le Pen stressing to her followers that they can't get complacent. And, quote, democracy has spoken and the French people have placed the National Rally and its allies in first place. Then going on to add, nothing has been won and the second round will be decisive.
In the end, despite an unprecedented victory in the first round, not only did Marine Le Pen's National Rally fail to win an outright majority in the National Assembly, thanks largely to a record number of tactical alliances between centrist and left-wing candidates, but the new left-wing Popular Front coalition actually came out on top. It's not only did the National Rally fall short of a majority, they actually lost to both the NFP and Macron's alliance. With the votes counted, the NFP are on 182 seats, Macron's alliance are on 168, and the National Rally on just 143. Of the remaining 84 seats, 45 went to the centre-right Republicans, and the remaining 39 went to smaller parties or independent candidates.
So you have a system where in this country, the National Rally, or in Britain as well, the National Rally would have been the governing party. But because they didn't, while they came in first place, they never actually got a majority, and so they had a runoff election. And so the French electoral system is really interesting, because you can then vote for a third party. Your vote is not thrown away. In our country, let's say, Missouri is not a swing state. Let's say you lived in Pennsylvania, okay, a swing state. Missouri is, who's going to win Missouri? Trump or Harris? Trump, okay, I mean, okay, Trump's going to win Missouri. If Harris wins Missouri, it will be the greatest landslide in modern American history for Harris. Because there's no other way Harris is going to win Missouri. But let's think of a swing state. So let's say, I think I saw the poll in Pennsylvania. Harris was up by less than 1%, 0.8%, I think, of the last poll I saw in Pennsylvania over Trump. It's basically neck and neck, all right? And so you got Harris, you got Trump, you got other parties too. What do you get? What happens if you vote for a third party in Pennsylvania? Is that third party going to win? No, they're not going to win. So what typically happens in America is that, hey, I know, I don't really like Kamala Harris or don't really like Donald Trump, but I really hate the other guy, okay? So, and I would rather vote for like the Green Party or the Constitutional Law Party or whatever, but if I vote for constitutional law, okay, who I really want to vote for, I think Harris could win Pennsylvania. If I vote for the Green Party, who I really support more than Harris, because they're actually our environmentally friendly party, you're actually going to help Donald Trump get elected. Okay? And so the way our system works is basically, if you're a swing state, you got to vote for one of the two people. Really, you have two choices, Democrat or Republican. I mean, it's just the way the rules are set up. Now, Missouri, it doesn't matter. So you can vote for wherever you want in Missouri, because it's going to be Donald Trump's going to win Missouri. Because, again, the way our electoral system works, if you win Missouri by one vote, how many of Missouri's 10 electoral votes do you get? You get all of them. okay? So if Donald Trump gets 4 million votes and Kamala Harris gets 3,999,999, who's going to get all 10 electoral college votes from Missouri? Trump. Okay, that's why there was all these fights about the election about Georgia, because Georgia, I think, I can't remember the exact account, but I think Joe Biden won Georgia by like 11,000 votes in 2020. So he got all their electoral votes. He got all, I want to say 16? I don't remember how many electoral votes Georgia had, but I think it's 16. Make it up. Let's pretend it's 16. So Joe Biden got all 16 votes from Georgia, okay, because it's a winner-take-all system. And, you know, therefore, it just doesn't matter in Missouri because Donald Trump. Yeah.
Like Nebraska, they got like that one congressional district.
There are 2 states that don't do it that way, Maine and Nebraska, and they have a weird system, which is kind of a weird. I don't want to go into it too much, but they don't do it that way. But every other state, it's a winner-take-all system. That's why if you ever see an election graph, you'll see weird polling for Nebraska District 2 or Maine District 1. It's like, why would you care what Maine? Because they do it that way. It's an odd. Those 2 states are kind of oddballs. It's just, you're throwing away your vote in our country because you've got 2 choices. It's either going to be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Now in France, you could actually, you saw in that sheet, there were other third parties that actually had some successful candidates. Isn't the case here. I'm not going to show this clip because it's kind of long, but there is a movement in a lot of, I think Alaska still does it, I think Maine still does it. It's called ranked choice voting. It's kind of a cool option, but anyone know how ranked choice voting works? What do you mean ranked choice voting? We don't do it as far as I know, although St. Louis was experimenting with it. Does anyone know? Does St. Louis City, are they doing it? Okay, St. Louis City is still doing it. Anyone know how ranked choice voting works? What is ranked? Yes? Exactly. So you vote, you rank your candidates, okay? And it's often called an instant runoff. You know how in France they had 2 weeks later you had another runoff? Well, here it's like immediately done that way. So there is some push to have what's called, you have to have a majority, not a plurality. You have to have a majority. So I think, for example, there was in 2022, I think it was 2022, could have been 2020, I think it was 2022 in Maine. I want to say Susan Collins, she came up with like 48% of the vote in the first round. And so they had to find people's second choice. So you could vote. So if you were, if you really, what's cool about this is it still gives you the choice to actually vote for a third party, the first choice. And then, so for example, if you like the Green Party, you could actually put your vote for the Green Party. But then, if no one gets a majority, and your vote would make a difference, then your second choice would get counted. So if your second choice is for whoever, is for Trump or Harris, then that would go towards that. So it's kind of a compromise between the way we do it, but the difference is you have to have a majority as opposed to a plurality. Majority means greater than 50%. Plurality means more votes than anybody else. In our system, for the most part, it's about a plurality. Whoever gets the most votes. The reason why people like this idea is also they believe it would be less toxic. Because you're not trying to get 47% of the vote. You have to get 50%. So the idea behind this being less toxic is that you can't piss off, pardon my French, the third party voter. So if you're trying, you can be crazy, you can say crazy stuff, right? But you want to make sure you don't, if Donald Trump or Kamala Harris don't want to be too crazy because they want your second choice vote. That makes sense. And so that's the idea behind ranked choice voting. I don't know how much that is true or not. That's the theory, that's the hope behind it. Alaska did it. I know, I'm drawing a blank on the congressman from Alaska, the first Native American member of Congress. Just her name eludes me. Deb Holland? I can't remember, sorry. The name of whoever that, the first Native American congresswoman from Alaska, she was elected via a ranked choice. She got the most votes in the first round, but it took the second round of voting before she actually got 50%. My concern with ranked choice voting is if we did this for every single office. I mean, how many of you have voted before in a big election, like maybe 2020? Anybody old enough to have voted in 2020? Okay. How long was the ballot in 2020? I remember. There's a lot of offices we vote for. We vote for president, we vote for governor, we vote for lieutenant governor, we vote for Congress, you vote for a senator, you vote for your law, just so many different offices, and then ballot issues. So imagine you have to have, okay, to do this, instant runoff, you don't just pick your one candidate, you have to rank every candidate on there. And if there's 5 or 6 candidates, or 7 or 8, trying to rank them all, you have to know enough about all the candidates, not just for president, but for your congressional seat, for your Senate seat, for your House seat, for your local state congressional seat, your state Senate seat. There's a lot of offices you have to know a lot of people for, and I worry that we wouldn't know enough about it. There'd be too many people on there, and it would the ballot would be really long, and it would be really hard to do that. So that's my concern with ranked choice voting. The French system makes more sense when you come back 2 weeks later. But the problem with American voting, and maybe it's not a problem, but we vote for so many different offices, okay? We vote for state legislature. The French it's a different system. It's a unitary system where the national government kind of runs everything. We have states that run stuff. We have city councils. We have so many different offices. I think part of our frustration, part of the reason why Americans get kind of burned out with voting is that we vote so much on so many different things. And I think and we have to know so many issues. Other countries have stronger political parties. So if you vote for Labour Party in England, this is what you're going to get. If you vote for the Tories, Conservative, this is what you're going to get. If you vote for the Lib Dems, this is what you're going to get. Whatever the candidate is, whether it's the prime minister or whether any other office, you're going to get the same. So I think our parties are really weak, and so you can have Republicans and Democrats in this country that don't really toe the party line all that much. In fact, that's what Coons, running for Senate, he's trying to distance himself from the Democratic Party. I think he's praised Donald Trump a couple times. He's a Democrat. He's praised Donald Trump in some of his ads. So he's trying to suck up to Republicans in Missouri, so he's trying to back away from that. You won't see that in other countries where you have strict ideological, here's what the party's going to do, and they vote in lockstep. Our parties don't always vote in lockstep. Another huge difference, besides our political structure, why Americans are different, is because we have the First Amendment. And we have a Supreme Court that has interpreted the First Amendment very, very broadly, very generously. There were a couple rulings. There was one, Buckley versus Vallejo, I actually agree with. It makes sense to me. There was another one, Citizens United, that I totally disagreed with. But what's fun about poli sci is, it doesn't matter what I think. It's what the Supreme Court ruled, right? So I can have an opinion, do what you want. And oh, by the way, we can all disagree. I generally, I always tell my students where I'm coming from. Generally, I'm pretty liberal, but don't feel like you have to agree with me. I tell my students that so they know where I'm coming from, so they know my perspective. Feel free to disagree with me. I think we too often demonize. My brother is a staunch conservative, big Trump supporter, and he's just a sweetheart. My cousin is one of the nicest people in the world, and she's a Trump supporter. So, you know, you got to be able to not hate the other side. So disagree is fun. A lot of this is, you know, I try not to give too much opinion in this, but obviously I have opinions. But just take it with a grain of salt where I'm coming from, just so you know where my perspective is. So, so the First Amendment, one of the things I agree with was 1976, the Buckley decision. The Supreme Court ruled that spending money on your campaign is speech. So if you are a billionaire, you're Taylor Swift's a long-lost sister, and she gave you $1 billion just to spend however you want to spend, you could actually, you know, spend that money saying what a great person. Or if Taylor Swift wanted to run, she could say what a great person she is, why you should vote for her. So if you've got money, you can spend your own money promoting your own candidacy. That is free speech. So the Supreme Court ruled that in 1976, in the Buckley decision, that you spending your own money is your speech. And you cannot put limits on that. Okay? So why do you think our campaigns are 2 years long or longer? Why doesn't our government limit campaign lengths like every other democracy does? First Amendment. Can you say you cannot promote yourself until 4 weeks before the election? No, because that is your right of free speech. So one of the reasons that we often don't think about is that our elections are so long is because we can't limit it. Congress has tried over the years to reduce the role of money in elections, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly struck down those limitations. So the reason why our elections are so long, they last 2 years, is because the Supreme Court has interpreted the First Amendment as your candidate's right to say what they want to do. And the same is true with Citizens United, and this is what I totally disagree with. Again, you're welcome to disagree with me, it's fine. You know, I think the Supreme Court was one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court's ever ruled. That corporations are people, and therefore corporations have the right to spend unlimited amounts of money as well as people. So to me, it makes sense that individuals can spend money bragging about themselves, candidates can brag about themselves. This ruling was that corporations are people, and therefore they can spend money on behalf of political candidates, which again, I totally disagree with, but it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what the Supreme Court thinks. So there you go. So we spend so much money in our election system. It's staggering. Let's see if this one works. I don't know if this one will work. I couldn't get the other one to work. Let's see if this one works.
It's a smart outdoor TV that can deliver brighter images with 1,000 nit brightness even in your sunny backyard.
No.
This TV.
No, still not working. Oh well. It's funny. It's a Daily Show clip where he goes to England and he talks about, how tired they talk about how tired they are of these long elections. I was like, I know, this has been going on for years. Like, no, our elections last 4 weeks. What are you talking about? Years? Years? What are you talking about? And then he makes fun of them and says, well, how do you spend $5 billion in 4 weeks? I was like, there's a cap of $5,000 on election cycles. Most a candidate can spend. It's $5,000. And you can't even do video ads. You can do billboards, and you can do radio ads. That is the extent. You can't, no TV ads for candidates in England, okay? Why can't we do that here? First Amendment, free speech. So we can't limit, if we wanted to, we couldn't do that. So it's very different in most other democracies. Again, it's just that is a similarity whether you're in England, Australia, or anywhere else in the world. They have very limited, you typically have monetary spending limits. They have time limits on how long campaigns can be. Okay. So, kind of going back to what I began with Harold Laswell. rules matter. Politics, who gets what, when, and how. How you do something matters. The reason why we have our system the way it is because of our rules. We have two parties because single-member districts. We have long elections because the Supreme Court said that you cannot limit spending on candidates. We have the most expensive elections in the world by far. If I had to guess, we probably spend more on our elections than every other country in the world combined. If I had to guess. I have not seen a study on that, but that's just my guess. So how you do something affects the outcome. And that's kind of a theme I talk a lot about in political science. And that really matters. So I know it's kind of wonky how you do something, but that's why we don't have. So if you're frustrated, but we also talk about it in American government. Why can't we get stuff done? And actually, we talk about it in comparative politics too. We just talked about it a couple weeks ago. Why it's so hard to get gun laws passed because of the structure of our government, our system of checks and balances, separation of powers, all that stuff. So the how matters, and that's kind of the lesson there. Third parties don't have a chance in our system. So you're welcome to vote third parties. If you don't really care between Harris and Trump, then vote third party. But if you have a slight preference, even the slightest, tiniest preference, vote for the one you have a preference for. Because your third party vote is not going to matter. Although to be fair, it's probably not going to matter so much in Missouri. Well, I guarantee it's not going to matter in Missouri. But so I guess in Missouri you could vote for who you want to because it's not going to matter. I'm sorry to say, but now other elections do matter. So don't not vote because there are other issues that do matter. It's not going to matter for president, unfortunately. We're not a swing state, but our Senate election is going to be really close. Hawley and Coons are within a few percentage points, so your election will matter there. Some of the issues, I think there's a couple issues. There's the abortion one. I think there's also sports betting going to be on the ballot. I've not seen polling on that, so there's a chance those votes will matter. So your local elections might matter. So there's a lot of other offices. So please make sure you do vote. So I'm not discouraging you from voting, but just realize that Missouri is not going to vote for Trump. That's why they don't even do polling in Missouri, because it's going to go for Trump. It's going to be hands down. But there are a lot of other offices out there, a lot of other issues on the ballot that matter. So go out there and vote. In fact, if just right outside, there's a voter registration booth. You can go out there and vote. So many issues on the ballot. Please vote. Are there any questions about any of this stuff?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do you think, like, one of the arguments that I've heard, historically speaking, is that third parties can be important for showing the other two parties, like, what issues are important to voters?
Yeah, that was an argument for excellent. That's great. Yeah, there was an argument for example, when Bill Clinton was elected, Ross Perot got close to 20% of the vote, and he didn't. Of course, he got 0 electoral college votes. He didn't win a state, so therefore he got no votes, electoral college votes. But he got 19-point-something% of the popular vote. And actually, because of that, his big issue was balancing the budget. Arguably, his vote for a third party, the people's vote for a third party, actually had meaningful impact because Bill Clinton saw that. So Bill Clinton won the election. He saw that, my God, Ross Perot got almost 20% of the vote, and his big issue was balancing the budget. And so, guess what? By the time Bill Clinton left office, we had 3 years of budget surpluses. The only 3 years in my lifetime that I was politically aware that we've ever had a budget surplus. And that was in large part because of Ross Perot's impact. So third parties can have an impact on messaging, and I think Ross Perot was a great example of that.
There's also the issue of, like, third parties getting elected to the smaller offices. Like, for example, the Populist Party didn't win any presidential elections, but in the case of Colorado, they won governor. And then in one of the labor wars, the Cripple Creek miners strike, the governor sided with the miners in that particular issue. And then when he was voted out of office, the workers didn't have the support anymore.
Yeah, no, yeah, so third parties can have an impact. They just, and even, maybe you have Bernie Sanders, right? He's a third party candidate. They can win. Angus King in Maine is also a third party candidate. So you can win at sometimes at state level, but nationally it's just not going to happen.
Does anybody have any questions? I'll walk over to you with the microphone.
And please don't let me discourage you from voting. I didn't mean to be negative. Just be realistic about your chances of Harris winning Missouri. It ain't gonna happen. Okay?
What about the electoral college? Because other countries don't have an electoral college.
Yeah, that's a really weird setup. And because it's majority, because the weird thing about our system is that if you win Missouri by 1 vote, you get all of Missouri's votes. That's why we had Trump winning in 2016, because Hillary easily got more votes, like 2.5%, almost 3% more votes. But because Trump won all the swing states, he was the president. And so
Was the electoral college vote break down by just having more? Or like, don't states have different electoral vote? Like some have majority rules, some have.
Well, I think one of my students earlier was talking about Maine and Nebraska, and they do things by congressional district. So you win a congressional district, you get that one vote. So that's why you'll sometimes see electoral college polling. You'll see presidential polling, and you'll sometimes see, Pennsylvania and Ohio or and Michigan. And then you'll see Nebraska 1, and then Maine 2, or whatever, because you want to see those are often swing districts, like we have swing states that are often swing districts. And so that's kind of where you're getting there. But except for those two, it's all winner take all. There was a study back in the early '90s after the Bush v. Gore issue, is that we'd all used the Maine Nebraska approach, and it turns out we'd been the exact same result as Bush would have wanted, and using that approach as well. So kind of weird.
Yes? Since everybody got up early?
Okay. All right, guys. Well, have a good day again. It takes you literally probably about 2 minutes to scan to vote, to register to vote. And you cannot vote if you're not registered. You have like 2 weeks. Wait.
October 9th.
About a month. Yeah, a little less than a month, 3 weeks maybe, to register to vote. So you can't vote on any of this stuff if you come up here. Have a good one.